Hi, welcome back to the FastAPI Okteto series. In the last video, I talked about how remote development environments are the new things that you should get to use. We looked at how with Okteto remote development environments, you have access to hot reloading for application, automatic synchronization, and you have an endpoint given to you, and you can debug even writing it. In this video, we are going to also use the development environment to continue where we stopped. In the last video, we looked at how to implement a couple of routes for our guestbook API. And in this video, we're making some modifications as well as connecting to a database. In the last video, we used an in-memory database and what happens when we restart our application or there's a new redeployment, our data gets lost. But we want a persistent database. So how do you use a persistent database with Okteto? So in this video, we're looking at all of those. So to give a quick recap, this video we're going to talk about connecting your database to Okteto using your normal Docker Compose services. We're going to use MongoDB. We're also going to make adjustments to our routes and we're creating models. So let's dive in. And before we move on, we need to update our requirements.txt file. Since we will be connecting to a MongoDB database, we need libraries that allow us to interact from our FastAPI API to the database itself. And after updating our requirement.txt file, we update our Docker Compose, and then we rebuild our initial deployment so we can have access to the MongoDB database. So we're going to make use of two packages. We're going to make use of Odymantic. It's an object document mapper. It enables us, create schemas as MongoDB schemas easily. Just like the same models you have for validation is what you have in your database. So we're going to make use of Odymantic and Moto. And now that we have these packages here, we are going to update our Docker Compose manifest, and we are going to have MongoDB, right? And we're going to use Bitnami's MongoDB image, Bitnami MongoDB latest, and we want the ports to be default port 27017, and the volumes is going to be Bitnami MongoDB, right? Now that we have this updated, it's time to run AutoStack deploy build. Well, the fresh build for application with these new updates. And so now that we are going to deploy a new version, it means we're going to have a new service here. So previously we have just a web deployment, but now we're going to have a MongoDB stateful set and a volume, so we can have persistent data. Even if you reload or restart your application 10 times, your data sticks with you. I am excited. Okay, so let's watch this as it goes. And while we wait for this to get deployed, we can go on ahead to create the files we need. So now we're going to move over to app here and touch create two files. We want model.py and database.py. Like I said earlier, we are going to create a model, which is essentially a MongoDB schema, and also a validation model that tells us how to impute data to the API. Originally, we have a couple of routes here, but since it is a guest book, we do not require users to have sign-in details. We just want you to come on, say something nice, and then leave. So we're going to make a way of this. So we're going to remove all of this here. So I just left with creating an entry, deleting an entry, and retrieving all the entries. And you can see we see our in-memory databases, but we're going to change all of this once our MongoDB service stateful set has been deployed. So let's check and see. It is progressing, and we can monitor from the logs immediately the MongoDB service has been deployed. We can move on. And while we wait for that, we can start by defining our model. Say from Odymantic imports model. Now, so we're going to create our model to be entry. That is our how do you want your data to be in database? How do you want it imputed? How do you want individual data to be in your database? So we want the name of the person, a string, and the entry itself as a string. Likewise, you could also have a date, and you can have date time dot what's the date time, the time, if you like. Okay, cool. Another benefit of using remote development environments with Okteto is you have the ability to debug your application. So in the events where we are building, we run into errors, we know that we can easily tackle these errors before pushing to production, because what you see in your dev environment is exactly what you get in production. That's why you should try and use remote development environments with Okteto today. Oh, so our MongoDB service has been deployed, as you can see from our logs, and so we can go and verify. And we have updated list of deployments. Now we have MongoDB and the persistent video. With a lot of this in place, we can kick off and say, fill up. We start our development environment, right? Okay, so while that is starting up, let's create sample data of how we want this to be. Well, we have schema extra, and we have example, and we have name, and this is going to be Abdul from Okteto. If we write dev advocate, and what entry do you want to add? Let me say remote development environment in Okteto is the next, is a big cool thing you should try. And we can make this optional, so we don't have to always fill this ourselves. This is optional. So we have from typing import optional one. Yes. Okay. And it's just going to be date time dot, let's make it this rather, so we have this instead. So now we have this model all set up, and we're waiting for our development environment to get started. So while we go back to our route and study it, we can see that we're going to make do of this in any moment. Then let's change our routes to asynchronous routes, so we can have a bit of easy integrations when we use our database, because with MongoDB, async operations are much more better than synchronous operations for databases, the speed and a couple more factors. So we've changed all this to async, okay? And so we are waiting for our dev environment so we can verify that everything's in place. Okay. Cool. So files are synchronized. Once again, I'd like to remind you that your files automatically synchronize. You have hot reload. Everything comes pre-installed. Your PIP, your tools come pre-installed. So you have Python main.py. So we can start our application. And once again, you have the endpoints here. And you have the status that says it's in development. So we go back here. And we go to docs. When you check the route, you can see that the previous routes which we removed are no more there. This is because we already have hot reload and auto synchronization installed and enabled by default. Okay, cool. So if you go back to your route, when you want to add a new entry, you need to manually put it to have an idea of how the entry should look like. If you have a guest or you need to give your application to a front-end designer or a front-end developer, how do you know what to pass? So now, since we defined our entry model here, we're going to make use of this in the route file. But first, we're going to say from app.model import entry. So now we are going to change this data to entry, and I will save this, and of course it automatically reloads. So when I go back here and I reload, and I have this example from the previous configuration in the model. So when I want to just apply an entry now, I already have something pre-installed, and anybody else can view my API and say, oh, when you want to add a new entry, you have to put a name variable and an entry variable, and that's all we need. But then, how do we put this? We have no idea. We've not set up our database. How do we do this? So the next step is to set up your database. Since we installed Odimantic and Moto, we've not configured it, so we need to do that first. Since we have our MongoDB installed in Okteto already, it's easy to connect. So we start by importing, we say from Moto async. We're going to use the asynchronous one. Also, import async to IO clients. Sorry, async IO mode to clients, and from OD Mantic imports AIO engine. These two requirements are needed for us to interact with our database. And so first we define the connection details. We're just going to name this, since it is in development mode, we're going to name this as MongoDB. MongoDB, which is the name of our deployment here. MongoDB, and then the port 27017. And we are going to say the client should be async clients connection details. And once our engine should be AIO engine clients is equals to clients, and database is going to be equal to, we're going to name our guest book. That is, all our data is going to be stored in this guest book database. So we have multi-client rather. Cool. So we have everything in place and we are eager to check how does it work. But now that we have this, we go back to our model file. We're going to basically write the helper files for inserting to database and to retrieve all the entries. And as a result, we have to import, so say from app.database import engine. And so we have the first one. We want to first start by creating a function to retrieve all the entries that we have in our database. So we say retrieve entries in database. Right, so we have entries, we await engine.find entry. Now the beautiful thing about Odimantic is it's very seamless to use. And now with this command now, it checks our guest book database for all files that have this entry collection that's stored. You know, like I said, when you insert a new value now, it's going to be in this form. So now that was what we're going to do. So we return the entries. And the next one is going to be to retrieve. Let's look at our route to know what next we're going to do. We have a single entry by ID, and we have a post entry. Or we have just to delete and then a post. So we start by posting to. So we are going to go back to model and say insert entry into database, right? But now we're going to take an argument because from the API we are, imputing something. So we're going to say entry, and so we have new entry should be await engine.save entry, and we are going to return in string format the new entry. Why are we returning this? Because when you save in MongoDB stores its ID in an object ID format, in a BSON format. And so you have to return as a string to make it visible. And now that we have these two methods defined, let's do a quick recap before we test them out. We started by defining the database connection variables. In production, obviously, this is going to be an environment variable. Towards the end of the video, we're going to change this to environment variable so we can see how it works in Okteto. This is your clients, and this is your engine. The engine is just basically the intermediary between our FastAPI code and MongoDB server. Now we have the name of database is guestbook, and we have everything set here. Now we go back to our model here, and we define our schema, our collection as entry. We want a name, an entry, and the date in which the entry is, inserted. We have an example here, so that whenever anyone checks our API documentation, he has an idea, or she has an idea, or they have an idea on how to send requests. Afterwards, we have two methods. The first one is to retrieve all the entries we have in the database, and we make use of the engine we defined earlier, and then it finds every collection similar to this, and then we have an insert, that is to insert a new entry into our database and into this collection. Now that we have this in place, let us test it out. First thing to do is to get rid of the in-app here. And since we are going to retrieve this, so we're going to start by importing again. We see from app.model. Oh, we already have it here. retrieve, and insert. So instead we say entries is going to be retrieve entries from database. Remember, it's an asynchronous function, so we await it here. And we're also going to get rid of this here. And we're going to also get rid of this. For now, let's start with just this and see. So we save this and then we go back to this and reload. First, we start by retrieving all the entries we have. Obviously, our database is empty, so we should expect an empty array. And now we have an empty array, meaning yes, connection to the database was successful. That's one thing to them. You could also, that means yes, it works. If it doesn't work, we are not going to have any of this success. When you check your logs, you can see that, oh, indeed, it worked. So now we can go on to insert an entry and then retrieve. So now let's go back to implementing this here. So we're going to have new entry should be insert this data. And remember, it's an asynchronous function, so yeah, with it. And then you have return a message that says new entry added with ID, right? New entry. Likewise, you can just say dot format instead. Sorry, this should be. Then we save. Then we go back here and now try it. Go to click on try it out, and then you execute. And now you can see we instead return all the data we have. But now we can go back to our model and see, oh, we were returning all of this data, but we wanted just the ID. So we say return that's ID. So once again, we are going to try this differently and say preview environments. In Okteto is the big thing you should try. So when we execute this now, we have new entry has been added with this ID. So how do we know if indeed this is working? Once again, go back to our entries route and click on execute. And now we have two entries here. And so now we've confirmed that yes, our MongoDB database is connected. If I decide to stop this server, my development server, and I restart it, and I go back here and I, reload, and I try to retrieve my entries, and I say execute, I still have my entries here. Why? Because our data is persistent compared to where we're using in app databases where the data is not consistent and persistent. Now that we have this in place, how about if we want to delete our entries? We have just one here. So we have an ID, but we should make it a string. Again, we go back to our model and check. We create a new method that says async define delete entry from database, right? You have an ID. And this time around, what do? First, you get all the entries. You see await engine.find entry, right? So you say for e in entries that you want to look through the entries, if e.id is equals to the object ID here, like this, then you want you want to delete from database, so you have delete this entry, and then you return. So we need to import this object ID here. The reason why we are wrapping this is because MongoDB doesn't understand when an ID is a string, because the IDs are stored in the object ID format. And so we have this method here, and so we're going to test it. We go back to our routes, so we have this. So we say await. You can just say await. Okay, we need to import it first, so we can say delete. Yeah, so say await delete ID, and then we save it. We go back here, we grab one of these, we close this, we try the delete routes, we put the ID and we execute it. So you have to reload because obviously you change it to a string. So we click on try it out, put the ID, and we execute. But are we sure this worked? Go back to this and when we execute again. And it works. We have successfully deleted an entry from our database. So do a quick recap of what we've done so far in the video. First, we connected the application to a database in Okteto. And that means in development mode, you have data you can work with. There's nothing like, your application has restarted, you lost the data you're working with. MongoDB in this scenario helps us keep our data persistent so you can test your application as you work before pushing to production. We've seen how we can connect, updates, and use these methods in our FastAPI. So we have our guestbook now has three functional routes. You can create an entry, retrieve all the entries, and delete an entry. Now, back to our database file. In most scenarios, it is a common practice to not store any form of environment variables in your code directly. And as a result, it means we have to change this because we can't leave it exposed. What if we are dealing with a database that is outside the scope of Okteto? We don't have to expose this. So what do? You can either create an environment file or in your Okteto, you can create an env file. So we have here, you can see touch.env, right? And you are going to say env file. We can just, we're going to have to move this here, fractal. You can have Mongo details, right? And you can just say it as MongoDB 27017. But for you to use this in your application, you also need a new dependency. So we say pip install python decouple. Once it's installed, you update our requirements file and say python decouple. And now we are going to make changes here and say from decouple imports config. So now we change this to config Mongo details. So when you check your env file, your Mongo details, it has been set. And so now we start our application again to see if indeed it works. Oh, sorry, we're going to see Python main, the py. So Mongo details are fine, declared as an envar or defined as a default value. Okay, so we have here, we are using this in web. We have environment, env. Oh, this doesn't work because in development mode, you are not allowed to use your env files. So how then can we make it work? Here comes the use of Okteto secrets. If I go back to my Okteto cluster here, and I go to settings, I go to secrets, and I click on add secrets. And now I have my secrets, Mongo details. In my Mongo details, what do I have? I have MongoDB 27017. And I click on add secrets. Now my secret has been added. And I go back to my application and I decide to restart this whole process once again. It fails. So we have Mongo details is going to be Mongo details here. Okay, now this one. Now, we have come to the end of this video, and we can see how it is easy to connect your application to database in Okteto so you can have persistent data while developing. In the next video, we're going to make use of Okteto secrets to see how you can reduce the risk of exposing your connection variables in your code directly and how secrets work. So a quick recap of what we've done in this video is connecting your application to MongoDB and how easy it is to connect it and work with it again in your remote environment. It is persistent, meaning even after closing your dev environment, your data remains stored. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next video. If you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe. If you have comments, please would like to see them, and I'll be very interested in how you use Okteto remote environment. What has been experienced so far. Please kindly share in the comments. Thank you.